This is Jacob's Algebra, Chapter 10, Lesson 6, Factoring Trinomial Squares. All the rest of Chapter 10 is going to be the same kind of material. We're going to be working on factoring different equations. So there's not going to be anything that is totally new in the rest of this. It's just taking what we've already learned and going a little deeper with it. So we've learned how to square the sum of two terms. Like if we have a plus b and we square it, we know that when we multiply that out, we're going to end up with a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. And we know that if we have the difference of two terms and then we square that, we'll end up with a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. Now, this lesson focuses on going the other direction. What if you have something, a polynomial, can you write it as the square of a binomial? So let's try one. If we have 4x squared plus 12x plus 9, can we write that as the square of a binomial? Well, it is in the right kind of form, it looks like. What we need to do is check to see how would we write this first term as a square? Well, 2x quantity squared is 4x squared. What about this last term? Well, 9 written as a square is 3 squared. If we can write this as the square of a binomial, then we should be able to write plus 2 times our first term times our second term, which is a 3, and that should be equal to the 12x. Let's see if it is. 2 times 2x is 4x times 3 is 12x. So that works, which means we can write 4x squared plus 12x plus 9 as 2x plus 3 quantity squared. What about x squared plus 4x plus 16? Well, our first number is a square. This is just x squared. Our last number is a square. 16 is 4 squared. What about this middle term? Well, if this actually is the square of a binomial, we should be able to, I don't know why I wrote an equals there. We should be able to, let me get rid of this first. If this really is the square of a binomial, we should be able to take double of our first term, which is x, times our last term, which is 4, and fit that right here in the middle. Is 2 times x times 4 equal to 4x? It's not. So that means that x squared plus 4x plus 16 cannot be written as the square of a binomial. It is not possible to write it that way because x plus 4 squared, which is what we would have to get our first and last terms, would give us x squared plus 8x plus 16, not x squared plus 4x plus 16. Also, anytime you're looking to see if something can be written as the square of a binomial, notice that your first and last terms always have to be positive. We have a positive a squared and a positive b squared. Positive a squared and a positive b squared. Only the middle term can be negative. Also notice that it's always the double of the product of a and b for the middle term, which means that your middle term has to be an even number. If it's an odd number, then what you have cannot be written as the square of a binomial. So let's go to a new page and start trying out some of the problems. Okay, so number 4 says express the area of each of the following figures both as a polynomial in simplest form and as the square of a binomial. Okay, so you see here part D from number 4. The diagram is already completely worked out for you. They've written the factors on the outside and they've written the product of the factors on the inside. So this is already completely worked out for you. What you have to write down is the factors. Well, you have to write down the factors and then you have to write down the polynomial. So what are our factors? Our factors are x to the 4th minus y times x to the 4th minus y. Now you can write it this way as x to the 4th minus y times x to the 4th minus y, or you can write it as x to the 4th minus y squared. It doesn't matter to me which way you write it. And then we need to write the polynomial in simplest terms. In simplest terms, we have x to the 8th minus 2x to the 4th y plus y squared. So make sure when you're answering the first problem in set 3 that you write out in factor form and in polynomial form what the answer is. You have to write both ways. So that's number 4, which is just like number 11 that I assigned for homework. The next one we're going to look at is number 5, which says find the following squares. You shouldn't have any problems with this one because this is just doing something that we've done before. If you have x minus 7 and you square it, this is part B, what would you end up with? Well, when we're doing a binomial square, that means that we square the first term, and then we double the product of our two terms. So we have, sorry, I started to write a plus here, but this one is a minus. That's not working real well. There we go. So then we've got minus 2 times x times 7 because we have to double the product of x and 7, and then plus 7 squared. So that's going to be x squared minus 14x plus 49. So that's how 5b works. You're just multiplying it out. Now you can do the grid and work it out that way, or you can write out the two parentheses next to each other and multiply it out that way. It doesn't matter to me how you choose to do it. Just make sure that you do it. And then part E is 2x plus 5y, quantity squared. So again, since it's the square of a binomial, we can use our method, which is to square the first term. So we have 2x, and we're going to square it. And then we're going to double the product. So plus 2 times 2x times 5y. And then we square our last term, 5y, and we're going to square it. So when we square 2x, we're going to get 4x squared. And then 2 times 2x times 5y. Well, 2 times 2 is 4, times 5 is 20. So we're going to have plus 20, and then an x and a y. And then 5y, when we square it, we get 25y squared. So that is how we multiply that out. We can use our formula where we square our first term, we double the product of the two terms, and then we square our last term. Or you can do your grid method. So we could do that if we wanted. Or you can just multiply it out. So if we wanted to do the grid method for this one, it would be 2x times 5y, 2x times 5y. And we would have 4x squared in the first box, and then we would have 10xy and 10xy and 25y squared. So this is something that you've been doing for a long time. I don't think this part should cause you any problems. This is number 5, which is just like number 12 that I assigned for homework. Okay, the next one is number 6, which says, if possible, write each of the following as the square of a monomial. Now this one y'all have been having problems with in the homework. So if you have something like 9x squared that you have to write as a square, you cannot just write 3x. That is not writing this as a square. You have to put it in parentheses and show that you're squaring it. So make sure that you write it as a square, don't just write the square root. For another example, we have part B, x to the 16th. How would we write that as a square? Remember, when we are squaring a power, we have to multiply our exponent. So 2 times what is 16? Well, that would have to be 8, because 2 times 8 is 16. You have to put the x to the 8th in parentheses and then square it. Okay, let's do just a couple more. We'll do part C, which is 400. That would be 20 squared. Let's look at part D. We have 121x. Can we write that as a square? Well, 121 is 11 squared, but we can't do anything to write the x as a square. If you have an odd power for your variable, you cannot write it as a square. It has to be an even power. So be careful. If you have one like part D, that one cannot be written as a square. So you have to write not possible. Okay, so I'm going to do just a couple more of these. What if we had 36x to the 25th? That is part F. Well, 36 is a square number. That's 6 squared. But can we write x to the 25th as a square? 25 is an odd number. That means we can't write it as a product of 2 and some other integer. So that one is not possible. Okay, let's do one more. We have part G, 64, x to the 6th, y to the 4th. Okay, so how would we write the number as a square? Well, that would be an 8. We're going to put this in parentheses and square it. To get the x to the 6th, we're going to have to raise the x to some power. What times 2 makes 6? That would be 3. Now we need to do our y. What times 2 is equal to 4? That would be a 2. So 8x cubed y squared, when we square all of that, will give us 64x to the 6th, y to the 4th. So that's number 6, which is just like number 13 that I assigned as homework. And you've had problems like this in the previous lessons. Okay, next problem is number 7. Number 7 says find the missing term in each of the following trinomial squares. Okay, so we'll do a couple of these. Part A, we have x squared plus something plus 64. Okay, you know that the form for these is a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. So if we look at this, we can see that our a has to be x, and our b has to be 64, and I'm sorry, my 6 looks a lot like my b. So our b is not 64, our b squared is 64. That means that our b is 8. So that means our middle term has to be the double of a times b. It has to be 2 times x times 8, and that is 16x. So 16x is what's missing from the middle here. Now we will do part B. Part B, we have x squared minus 22x plus blank. Okay, so again, we have a squared minus 2ab this time because it's a negative, plus b squared. Our a has to be x. We don't know what our b is, but we know that negative 2ab is 22x. So if negative 2ab is equal to 22x, and we know that a is just an x, so I'm going to go ahead and replace that with an x here, then that means that negative 2b has to be 22. So has to be negative 22. So our b must be 11. So we need to square the 11 to put it in this last place, which is 121. Okay, the last one we're going to look at is number 7, part D. That one is 36x squared. I'm sorry, I keep making my 6's look like b's. 36x squared plus 12x plus something. We have to figure out what goes at the end. Again, we have a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. So we're trying to figure out what is b. Well, our a squared is 36x squared. That means our a must be 6x. We know that our 2ab is 12x. And our a is actually 6x. So we have 2 times 6x times b equals 12x. Well, that means that our b has to be 1 because 2 times 6 times x is 12x. So when we square our 1 for this last position, we only get a 1 there. So this was number 7, part D, which is just like number 14 that I assigned for homework. Okay, the next one